Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Today we're going to dive right back into chapter 6 of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Now this particular chapter is it's one of the larger ones, not the largest, but it does have 34 sentences, so I'm going to break this one up into about 7 videos or so. The title of it is Weak Points and Strong. And I know he's touched on it before, the whole concept of weak points and strong points. I guess in this particular chapter he's going to touch on it a little more strongly. And he has some certain points he wants to pull out and make, so we're going to cover through it. Today, we're only going to focus on the first 5 sentences. Now, some of these sentences won't apply to the tabletop real well directly, but if you think about them a little more carefully, like much of his work, you'll be able to start relating the concepts more to the tabletop, even though they don't seem like it. So let's just get started. I'll walk through all 5 sentences and we'll see what he means. Okay? So, Sun Tzu said, "Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted. Therefore, the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed onto him. Now, by holding out advantages to him, he can cause the enemy to approach of his own accord, or by inflicting damage, he can make it impossible for the enemy to draw near. If the enemy is taking his ease, he can harass him. If well supplied with food, he can starve him out. If quietly encamped, he can force him to move. Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected." So these 5 sentences are essentially, we're talking about one concept. It really is focusing on the idea that you've got 2 commanders who are trying to basically impose their will on the battlefield, and you have to be the one that is doing the imposition of the will, not letting your opponent do things. And he talks about a couple ideas of how to go about doing that. Now, some of these are very, very easy to apply. Others are not. You have to think about it a little bit. So let's just work our way through it. Now, the first sentence where he talks about getting to the battlefield first versus second, you're fresh versus tired, that really doesn't apply too much in our games. Now, if you think about it, there are certain scenarios that you can write where you can introduce this particular concept. So again, if you're playing a narrative campaign, or writing a narrative campaign, scenario, you could introduce this situation where a defender or one of the 2 sides has some sort of penalty because they have been fighting too long, or they rush to get to where they're going. They're maybe disordered, or whatever. But that's really the only real application it has, is in the actual crafting of a scenario. If you want to really stretch it, you can look at this from the perspective. Let's take it for. We'll go to the extreme. Use a tournament scenario or a situation. In this case, you're obviously not going to. It doesn't matter who gets up the table first, okay? But where this I think does apply is in how you handle yourself in the tournament. You have a schedule to keep. You need to be at the table in order to play the game by a certain time. It's important you're not rushing around right up to that moment. You want to get there ahead of time, so you have some time to take a look at the table, get comfortable with it, know what's going on, kind of get in your zone, so to speak. So in a sense, if you get there first or get there early, then you'll have that time to prepare mentally, and you will be, quote, rested in time for the fight. In a casual game, not so much, but I do want to make this one point. If you are playing, let's say just go on with your weekly games with your buddies at the wherever you go, you really want to have the most fun you can get out of that. So do yourself a favor and try not to rush yourself and get a flurry of activity and run late, and just relax, to get there on time. Try not to set up a situation where you got some real time pressure ahead of it. I know sometimes we all come home from work and we're kind of frustrated. There's stuff we got to do, and it's it'll distract us. Give yourself a time to get to your buddy's house or get to the game store, wherever it is you're going to play. Chat for a little bit, ease yourself into it, relax, get rested so that you'll be fresh for the game. That will just maximize your enjoyment. So not necessarily how to win tactically here, but it's how to enjoy the game. That's really what we're in this hobby for in the first place. Even if it is a tournament, you're there to enjoy yourself. The thrill of the competition is something to enjoy. If you're tired and you're frustrated and you're tense, you're not going to enjoy it as much. So enough of that. So let's go on to the next sentence. Now this one's a very interesting one because he says a clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy and doesn't allow the enemy to impose his will on him. He's actually mentioned this before in a couple different sentences throughout the book so far, where you want to be sure that you are doing what you intend to, when you intend to, for the reasons you intend to. That's the second point he's trying to make. I want to bring that up first because it's important. Because if you cannot control yourself to the point where you are acting instead of reacting to what your opponent does, then it's going to be very hard for you to actually impose your will on the opponent. In other words, force him to take actions he may not have wanted to take or make him do things he wants to do. So in a tabletop scenario, let's look at it in this way. If you need your opponent to do something to make your life easier, let's say moving a unit out of position where he's got an advantage. Let's say he has cover, so it's hard to hit, or maybe he's hidden, you can't see him, but you need to draw that unit out where you can get to it. You need to threaten something and force him to bring that unit out. Make it so he has to do that. That way you're imposing your will, and now the unit is available to be shot and hopefully destroyed. That's just one example. Now, one of the things that's interesting is if you take this one to its logical conclusion, it goes to the extreme of basically meaning, we'll quote Colonel Henderson. He's a biographer of American General Stonewall Jackson, and he indicated, as he was writing about him, he makes a comment about the mark of a great soldier is that he fights on his own terms or he doesn't fight at all. Now, obviously in a game, you can't do that because you're there to fight, you're there to have the match. But let's take that extreme and let's put it on the tabletop, because you have to have the battles, but each battle game is made up of several small engagements. Each turn could even be a separate engagement. So to use this quote from this Colonel Henderson, one mark of a great soldier is that he fights on his own terms or not at all. So be very careful. Don't necessarily take the bait. We'll talk a little bit more about bait in a second. When your opponent tries to make you do something he wants you to do, don't respond. Don't react to him. Respond to him. Think carefully about what if he does this. What is he wanting you to do as a result? What should you do so that you're not doing exactly what he wants you to do? If you can master that, and that takes a lot of practice, as any good art does, it takes practice, you'll get better at being able to impose your will while preventing your own opponent from imposing their will on you. So that's what his second sentence is really talking about. Now, the third sentence, by holding out advantages to him, he can cause him to approach of his own accord, or by inflicting damage, he can make it impossible to come near. Now, one of the earlier commentators on this, one of his nearby contemporaries, a couple 100 or so years after he wrote this, kind of made the comment about the first part of the sentence is he'll entice his opponent with bait, and the second he'll actually strike at some other location so that the enemy can't attack you like you want to. He has to go defend this other thing that you're attacking. So in those thoughts, those apply really, really well to the tabletop. Now, I've already talked about baiting in a previous video. He actually covers that in one of his earlier chapters. So what if you think about the bait concept, just in a summary, as you go to try to figure out what your opponent, you don't want to make your opponent do something, you want to give him something that will entice him to take the action you're expecting. Let's go back to the example with the unit you want to bring out in the open. Give him a target that's just out of range, but you want him that he wants to destroy. Forcing that unit forward so that it can engage your bait. That way, you can bring him near, and then you can do something about it. He thinks he wants to do it, but in fact, you are the one who made him do it. Okay. And the other half is actually, this is sometimes a spur of the moment kind of thing. It's going to take some time to figure out, practice how to identify these situations. But on a tabletop, you don't have the luxury of attacking some other table two tables down and forcing your opponent to reinforce that table instead of yours. Okay? We're not talking about that kind of redirection or threatening a different flank somewhere. What we're talking about here, an example would be where you have a unit that is going to be, he's going to press forward and try to engage you, maybe your most important units, with a key unit of his. What you may want to do is, instead of letting him do that, you want to threaten an area of his line, his forces, with a unit that unit is actually designed to take out. You're not using bait here. You are actually going to do a feint. Now, a feint is not a fake attack. Well, I'll talk about feints and fakes in a completely different video, but what we're talking about here is you want to attack part of his line with real intention, with a unit that the unit you're afraid of is actually capable of destroying. Okay, so let's use a tank unit. You're going to use an armored unit to threaten some point in his line away from your most important units, and he's going to threaten you with maybe it's a tank unit that could, or armored unit that could do some real damage to the core of your force. Well, this armored assault over there on the flank at some other point on the table might force him, if you design it right, to redirect that attack to deal with your flanking armor instead of dealing with the main core of your force. Now, you just did what Sun Tzu's talking about here. You're preventing him from coming near because you forced him to redirect his forces. This can be done also, and if you got any game system where you have reserves coming in, you can bring those reserves, a fresh threat that wasn't on the table before, into a new section of the battle, forcing your opponent to redirect their efforts. Again, keeping them from approaching you. Now, it's not always going to happen. This, again, you're working against an opponent who's going to try and do the same thing to you. So don't give up if you fail it the first few times. Keep practicing. Okay. The fourth statement, a sentence about if he's at ease, attack him. If he's well supplied, starve him out. That doesn't really apply well to the tabletop, except this one concept. Where always find a spot where he seems to be comfortable, where he thinks he's safe, or he's not worried, and give him something to worry about there. Okay, harass him in different ways. Always try to keep him off balance a bit. Obviously, supplies don't play well into the game. Being in camp doesn't apply well, but the mental game of feeling comfortable about where a particular unit are, or the safety of a component of the opponent's force is. If you can play that mental game and disrupt his comfort in that, then you'll start to play in that. Very hard to do, very subjective. It really means you got to play with your opponent, understand him a little better, and that doesn't always happen in the span of one game. Now, finally, though, appear at points where the enemy must hasten to defend and move swiftly to places you're not expected. Now, we've talked about this one in a lot more detail in previous videos, especially in the case of direct and indirect attacks. And that's really a similar concept here. He's, again, just trying to reinforce and taking those concepts you talked about earlier and applying them to this one concept about imposing your will on the opponent. So it's those things called indirect attacks where you move where you're not expected, attack where the enemy needs to defend, he's weak and maybe needs to reinforce. Those indirect attacks aren't just meant to disrupt the opponent. They're meant to impose your will and force the opponent to do something that they maybe weren't planning on doing, and they now have to waste energy doing. So that's what these first 5 sentences are talking about. The concept is imposing your will on your opponent. It kind of sounds mean. This is war, though, okay? And this is a war game. So we'll have a very friendly contest of wills most times. In a tournament setting, it is a little more vicious, I'll call it. But that's just my term. So take some time to think about this one. You have your will, what you think needs to be done on the battlefield, and what you need your opponent to do to make your victory easy. Remember, the opponent has to allow you to win, okay? You can't force the win. You have to make your opponent do something to make mistakes. We talked about that before. So here, how are you going to impose your will on him so that he does make those mistakes? He does give you the opportunity to win. As long as you do everything you need to do right and he makes his mistakes, you will likely win. So that's what we're talking about in this first 5 sentences. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found some value out of this. Again, feel free to comment below. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to address those in follow-on videos. And see you next time as we talk about the next few sentences in Sun Tzu's Chapter 6, Art of War. All right? See you next time. Bye-bye.